Welcome back. This is K24 this morning. Of course, having our discussion here as far as the events of the weekend are concerned. Mheshimiwa Junet Mohammed was caught in a situation where he said some things that were not taken lightly by a section of Kenyans. And we're just having this conversation with Fred Okango, Lydia Maitha, and Gloria Orwoba. And Fred, I'll come back to you. You defined hate speech. And we are trying to find a fine line, or rather we're trying to get rid of the fine line between hate speech and freedom of speech. If you are, in charge of NCIC right now, would you actually go after Junet?
First of all, before I answer that, it is important that we understand the hate speech, the free speech, and the political speech. Some of the statements that have been made by us politicians are actually free speech or political speeches. But hate speech is designed in a manner that is meant to prejudice a certain group of people.
Okay,
and I've seen it going on.
Just hold on, because I want to ask Gloria this question. Gloria, if someone calls, as a sitting president, Mtoto wa Umbo, for example, is that considered hate speech? Is it considered political speech? Is it considered freedom of speech?
To me, I think it cuts across. It cuts across, and it's not just someone. It's an elected person who's actually getting that audience and using it to, divide the people. So, and it's not just, I have been at funerals where I've seen other people, utter the same kind of things to elected leaders, not only to the president, but to elected leaders, to governors, senators. And I think that at the end of the day, what we really need to ask ourselves is, where do we draw the line? Where do we, at what point do we say then, okay, as much as this is your free speech, and as much as we have gotten it defined by our constitution, there has to be some level of accountability. So it might not construe of hate speech to the point that we could actually take you to court and hold you accountable. But then when you're talking about standing in front of a podium and having an audience that is there basically looking to you as a leader, and what you're doing is inciting them by using your free speech, then there has to be some level of accountability. Otherwise, we also can't say that every other time someone has a bone to pick with the other elected leader, we are going to keep running to court. It's simply an issue of cultivating a culture that has Kenyans understanding that as a leader, there is some level of responsibility that you need to exercise. There is some level of you can't just be walking around and behaving like a common citizen, private citizen. Okay. Yeah.
Lydia, common citizen, kawaida citizen. So does that mean that I can, insult you publicly the way I want, across the street, and I will be, I'll be considered a kawaida Kenyan. Wamekosana tu. Na wanaweza tukanana, sorry. But when I do it to, or when a leader, an MP does it to another MP, then there's a problem.
And I think that's what we're struggling with this morning. Because, like Okango has said, hate speech is well defined. It's got to be against, creating prejudice against a group of people. But here you are, if you and I tunatukanana nikuite umbwa, unite monkey, am I to be prosecuted? What's the crime there? And if you are, and I think people have taken each other to the chief. I think women in the villages, mtu akitukana mwingine, they take each other to the chief. But I don't think we have risen to a level where you tukana umbwa or something, unless you take the next step where you act violently. I don't think we have actual regulations that regulate that conduct. I don't know whether it rises to the threshold of a criminal offense. So I would say that what Junet did, he was not speaking against persons with disability as a group.
He was talking about an individual.
Yes, he was speaking against Mwaura.
But his
and so the fact that people, you were aggravated by what he said against this particular individual, that's another conversation. But if you were to take him to court, he would have that defense and say, I did not speak about persons with disability. So I think the question is, all over the place, including on social media, people call each other all kinds of things. How do we regulate that kind of behavior? And I want to pause and say that you cannot, take it to the legal realm.
All right.
I think this has to be, we have to choose to be better people. So we have to choose to treat each other better.
Okay. Fred, before I get to Gloria, because I know she wanted to interject there. So if I decide to call someone huyu mjaluo ni mjinga sana. Have I called the entire Luo communities, you know, idiots?
I belong to the Luo community.
Okay. So
and I am a representative of the Luo community by that virtue.
Okay.
And therefore, it is obvious that you are referring to a representative of the Luo. And
but am I talking about the community?
You might be talking about Okango.
Okay.
But somebody might interpret it differently. But that's not the issue. You know, Mbovi,
yes.
Let's look at, there's even modern hate speech where we have seen class wars, and you have seen them. When people say, nyinyi watu, mtajua hamjui, raundi hii, mtaona cha mtema, you know.
Now you have grouped them.
So what, you have grouped them. And it comes heavy in political sloganeering, where people put us or them versus others. And they start saying, this time, we shall form this government by these people. And you know, if you look at the provisions of freedom of expression, it says that that freedom of expression shall not extend to advocacy of hatred and incitement to violence. When you mobilize a certain group of class and tell them you have been suffering for so long and the reason for your suffering is because of this class called whatever, whatever.
Okay.
Do you know, you are actually inciting them. And that is the modern type of hate speech that we also should talk about. Okay. And you know what? In the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020, as proposed by the BBI, there is a solution. And that solution has been captured in the provisions in amending the legislation in Article 80. And it says that because it covers on the integrity of a leader, now any person who is found culpable and has been taken to court on this matter, we must now expedite the trial, investigation, and even conviction of such a matter so that we don't have many of them. I was shocked the other day when I was reading the newspaper that my good friend Moses Kuria is still having an incitement case in court which happened several years ago. Look at how it takes time. That is not justice. And therefore, there are so many solutions that are being offered to this. But I want to say this.
Okay.
Hate speech can be defined in so many ways. But for as long as it prejudices a certain group of people, for as long as the utterances are geared towards causing violence, ethnic incitement, all-class incitement, it remains hate speech. I've seen the media draw caricatures or cartoons of politicians. You know, the other day they drew Mwaura as a white monkey. Do we say that is hate speech? The other day they drew Raila Odinga with the bulged stomach. The other day they drew William Ruto, you know, in a funny way. Would they go to court and say this is hate speech? I don't know. But what I'm saying is we must now be careful. Okay. We must be careful because even if we are looking at political accountability from our leaders, but the slogans that our politicians use are the start of hate speech. In fact, the biggest hate speech. And I was just discussing with Lydia here, maybe NCIC, as you asked me so that I finish, should now start looking at how do we even create a hate speech fund so that the moment you get into a public office or a state officer, then you start paying towards hate speech fund because these are shameless politicians or leaders who have no shame going to the podium and shaming others while they shame them.
Why am I paying this fund as a politician?
Because this fund now shall be a penalty. Because we don't know when Frederick Okango will be at the podium and say, Mtoto wa umbwa.
So I should pay in advance
because we have accepted that our politicians are shamelessly shameful, then they will always be in the line of hate speech, you know?
Okay, I like the fact that you're coming up with a solution. But, Gloria, you know, Mheshimiwa Isaac calls himself, uses the hashtag rather, Muthogo wa Ruiru. And I was just asking one of our STOs, and she said that it means Mzungu wa Ruiru. Is it okay then if, for example, and this is just for example, I as Paul Mungala Mbuvi, if today I start using a hashtag, ule mjinga wa Nairobi, then Fred during one of his speeches aseme, kwanza ule mjinga wa Nairobi juzi alisema kitu fulani. Does it now mean that Fred was actually referring me by my title?
First of all, there's nothing wrong with grouping people. We group people every day, and there's nothing wrong with them. We group people. I hear a lot of guys from Luo Nyanza saying, you know, we are all engineers, we are all doctors, we have PhDs. So when they refer to those people, they refer to them as, you know, the bright and the elite. We group MPs. We call them, you know, those are our elected leaders. We group private citizens. Myself, I just said here, if you are an elected leader, you cannot just be talking like a common mwananchi. That is me grouping people. When our athletes go out there to run, we say wakimbizi wa Kenya. That is grouping them. So, and when the people with disability come out as a group, there's nothing wrong with that. My sister here, my friend, let me say, here in studio, is actually representing the daughters of the mountain. Why are we not saying that that group should be castigated? So therefore, when people come and say we are hustlers, no, so therefore when people come and say we are hustlers and people say wale ambao wamezoea ABCD, it's just grouping. There's nothing wrong with grouping people. Okay. So I want to, the issue then,
let Gloria finish.
Let me finish, because I've heard Okango say that the biggest mistake that we are making now is we are going into group people and creating this narrative that is divisive against, you know, hustlers and dynasties. And I'm trying to say that grouping people is not a problem. Yourself, when you're sitting in media, we call you guys the fourth estate, a group of people. So where does the issue then come in? The issue comes in where, for instance, I sit in studio, I am from Kisii, and I start speaking hateful utterances that are, for instance, going to start placing the daughters of the mountain in a place where they are feeling that I'm actually creating some hatred. So the issue is not about grouping people. The issue is not about pointing out that we have the poor who are called hustlers, and then we have those families that have been born in wealth and we call them dynasties. So at the end of the day, the utterances that we need to hold our leaders accountable are those that are specifically pushing to incite violence. And by the way, Junet did not abuse Isaac as an individual. Junet abused the people with disability, and particularly the albinos. That is just a fact.
All right. Yes. You know, Lydia, you seem to disagree with her on so many levels. Are you disagreeing with her on the, you know, the daughters of the mountain, you know, title, or is there something else that she has said?
No, Daughters of the Mountain, and may I send a shout out to all of them wherever they are. They feel greeted, including our chief patron, Governor for Kirinyaga, Anne Waiguru. I am disagreeing with Gloria in this sense that the issue is when you have rhetoric that creates an us versus them scenario. So that you have a group, even if it's persons with disability, who then you pit against, say, women. Or you have Christians pitted against another group like, say, Muslims or Hindus. Then that's the problem. It's when you pit one group against another group. And that is why we have a problem with the hustler narrative, because it is not devoid of that problem.
But isn't that politics in a nutshell? Isn't Jubilee against ODM, for example, during the elections that were then?
But you see, the people in ODM and the people in Jubilee are in all the diversities that are in on both sides. But there is no specific category of people. This is political ideology. So if the disagreement, if you're grouping ourselves in terms of ideology, it's unlikely, because we have not brought our humanity, things that we cannot control, into it.
And that is what I thought the hustlers versus dynasties narrative is all about.
It is not ideological, because the hustler versus dynasty narrative, it's against particular families, it's against particular people. And then you have a group calling themselves hustlers, you know, and by the way, then half of them who propagate that ideology, I mean, not that narrative, are not poor in any sense. So when she tells us that hustlers are poor, I also don't know what they mean.
Gloria, I'm coming to you.
So the point is this. The point is this. Any rhetoric that promotes an us versus them, anything you say that creates an us versus them kind of a scenario is what NCAC is here to fight against. We are not saying that groups of people is a problem. People organize themselves as teachers, trade unions, you know, and they fight for their rights and their interests. That's okay. But you cannot now say teachers against doctors, doctors, you know, that's where the problem comes in. And for us, as long as as long as the narrative of hustler versus dynasty is detrimental to one group.
Yes.
Right? One group marking themselves as victims.
Yes.
And deciding that others are their oppressors, then it is going to continue to be problematic. And there is no sanitizing it.
Fred.
Yes.
Punguza Mzigo, one of the initiatives that your party was behind.
Absolutely.
Was also an us versus them kind of situation.
Not at all, because maybe before I answer that, I just want to comment on something that Gloria said. Hustler Gloria and many others cannot attempt to amend the provisions of an inalienable right of freedom of expression. She cannot attempt to amend that. Okay. Because what we are talking about is advocacy of hatred, which vilificates others and also leads to discrimination. This is a slogan that is very good, but in its goodness, it has pitted them versus the others, and therefore they had to look for who is the opposite of a hustler. Okay. And therefore, in their definition, which is operational, the opposite is the dynasty. Now, what you are doing when you say, hii serikali tutajenga na nyinyi mahasla, hii serikali ni wakati wenu si wakati wale wa madynasty. You know, you are already pitting others versus them. And what you are creating, you are actually advocating for hatred. Now, Punguza Mizigo. The concept of Punguza Mizigo was not only in numbers. It was also in the socio-economic welfare. And the burden that we continue to say, and also in the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020 has been propagated adequately, is that the burden is greatest at the bottom. The burden is greatest at the economic level. And that's why, in providing a solution, we now must go for the bottoms-up approach, where we use the smallest unit of a devolved function as the unit of accelerated development. I have seen people out there saying that because the hustler includes or compromises of the people at the bottom, now we start building them from bottoms up. They are forgetting that they are speaking the same language with the proponents of the Constitutional Amendment Bill, but they are saying it in a manner that it is now a hatred message which must be stopped. I don't have a problem with that slogan at all. I have a problem with that slogan when it is pitted against the others, and that's why I'm saying we cannot at any given time attempt to redefine freedom of expression and what it should not extend to. What it should not extend to is advocacy of hatred, which vilificates or demeans or discriminates another group that defines hate speech as a designed speech or communication that is intended to prejudice against a certain group. In this narrative, it prejudices against the people who are meant or who are supposed to be people who have worked hard in their life, owned their small car of Toyota, and because I am a border rider or because I have a bicycle, I look at you and look at you as a dynasty. And therefore, because I'm told that I'm going to make the next government, I should look down upon you and burn your car. And because I'm told that I must form the next government, I should look at you and tell you now, you must go because you have overstayed in power. It is wrong. It must stop.
Gloria, you were saying something in terms of, I think, are you trying to define the hustler versus dynasty narrative?
You know, half of the things that that Okango has spoken is just propaganda, because the hustler narrative is not putting up any groups of people against the others. What we are simply pushing for, and please allow me to be clear on this one, is for a very long time, there has been an exclusion of people. An exclusion of a certain group of people. Those are the people you hear every other time the deputy president referring to as Mama Mboga, watu wa boda boda, you know, those kind of utterances. There has been an exclusion of these people in terms of now, you know, coming to the table as leaders and building the government. So he's saying that the ideology behind that movement is that we have to push for economic empowerment for those people who have felt completely marginalized in terms of being a part of that national cake. Okay. So when someone then decides, and you'll realize the people who are so against that terminology, the hustler, when you really go through their background, it is because these people have been born into wealth, and which is not a problem. It is not a problem to be born into wealth.
Because the problem with the hustler
can you allow me to finish?
Gloria, continue, please.
It is not a problem that you have been born into wealth. It is not a problem that you have been born in state house. The problem comes when, because of your status, because of the situation, the privilege that you have, you then are not, you are not actually being rewarded for any kind of hard work that you have personally done. It becomes that you're being rewarded out of the fact that you are within those circles where decisions are made. Okay. It becomes then an issue for a person who's equally working as hard but is not born into that wealth and is not able to access the kind of networks, the kind of opportunities that you're able to access. Okay. But that is not the narrative of the hustler. The Hustler Nation movement simply is about including those who for a very long time have been excluded from building government from the national platform. And by the way, when I see some of the leaders, and I've seen, for instance,
what are the statistics for this?
Leader, we're coming to you. Yeah.
Charles Nyachai is a typical example of what people would assume is a dynasty. Okay. But he himself has said, because he has been in that situation where he was privileged to be born into wealth, he wants to now be part of a movement that creates the same opportunities for those who are not privileged to have been born into wealth, so that those who are hardworking are actually being rewarded by merit. So at the end of the day, when we are busy talking about economic empowerment for these certain people who've been marginalized. And then a certain few come out and they feel as though, you know, if that narrative or if that ideology, because it is an ideology, it is a movement that is based on people who want to push for economic prosperity. When that ideology catches on, then they feel that now most of their people who, and I say their because I have grouped them as those who have been born into wealth, as those who have been subjected to opportunities beyond even what they can tap into, when they feel that, oh my goodness, there's a panic, there's an idea here that could actually empower masses of Kenyans, so where does that leave me? And so then they start feeling excluded. They should simply come up with their own ideology, their own movement, and push for it. Okay. Instead of trying to create that, they're now trying to sell fear that if you empower these ones who are at the bottom, then for the other people, they need to understand that, you know, a time is coming, you won't get those opportunities.
Okay, clearly that's the spirit of a hustler there.
The spirit of a hustler.
Lydia, as we conclude on this conversation, do you feel, though, just as the hustler has been defined there, because a hustler is a workaholic, someone who's working hard for what they earn, someone who is passionate about their job and everything, do you feel as though then, kusema ukweli, that particular hustler, according to that definition, has been denied opportunities to even reach to a level where he can just appreciate himself?
By the very evidence of the deputy president who calls himself a chief hustler, he has proven that in this country, if we were to take his word, you can actually rise from being a chicken salesman to being a deputy president. Okay. So that there is evidence that in this country, you can actually come from the bottom and rise to the top. Okay. That opportunity exists.
So you don't feel as though dynasties are holding all the resources?
So what I'm saying is this, the evidence is to the contrary, is that in this country, you can actually have a Kenyan dream and you can actually thrive. Let's actually go statistically. When she says that there is this community of people who are coming from poor backgrounds, who have been denied a chance to be on the table, if we carry out a study of all the MPs, sitting and former, their backgrounds, how they ended up in parliament, I am quite certain over 80% are people of ordinary means, of very modest backgrounds, from peasant families who have ended up on the decision-making table. Because in this country, we have something called democracy, and people elect who they want. Sonko is also one of the people who, you could say, came from a very, difficult background. And he has ended up you know, including prison, convicts are able, able to rise from, you know, that past and be able to get into government and lead and make decisions on behalf of their people. So the evidence is to the contrary. But this is what I would like to assert.
In conclusion, please.
In conclusion.
Yes.
The assumption that everybody who is opposed to this hustler narrative is coming from a place of privilege is a huge it's a problem. It is a problem because that is what is aggravating the masses. It is what is creating an us versus them. It is what is making that border person feel, I don't have a car, because these people who are talking cars against, who are driving cars, took my opportunity. You just had her say that these are people who have been exposed to opportunities beyond even what they can exploit. That is the thinking of that border, and that's the thinking they're transplanting in our people. This is not how you solve poverty. You solve poverty through policies, such as the Women Enterprise Development Fund, such as the Youth Fund, such as the National Government Affirmative Action Fund, which I've just seen the Deputy President told the hustlers that he's going to be giving 100 million annually for them to be doing business, to be borrowing and doing business. Do you know, as at January 2021, Women Fund, Uwezo Fund, GAF, Youth Fund have issued in excess of 100 million in 1 month alone in 2021. You solve poverty through policies. You solve poverty by creating infrastructure for investment, by lowering the cost of energy so that wealth can actually be disbursed and dispersed amongst your people. So this hustler narrative, it is not a policy. Wheelbarrows are not a policy. We will not end poverty by sloganeering. We will end poverty by having sound policies and sustainable measures to fight, you know, to fight economic disempowerment.
All right. Fred, unfortunately, you have 2 minutes max.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm a very brief man.
Okay, 20 cards.
Now, finally, I am very glad that Dr. William Ruto, a very good friend of mine, has acknowledged that the economy must be built bottoms up. And I'm also happy that in the Constitutional Amendment Bill 2020, it has guaranteed an economic system with a shared prosperity that will ensure that there's equitable economic opportunity for everyone, including ourselves, and which is sustainable. And you know what? It has also gone ahead and said that let us now look at the people who are the hustlers. These hustlers, many times, they get help through the SMEs. How do we now ensure that they are supported through the SMEs, which they can now get more than just 100 million? You know, they're saying, in that SME Act, it is amended to secure the young people, who most of them are hustler, me and Gloria and Lydia included, because everyone is a hustler. Now protect them from the tax regime that is very expensive and give them a tax-free period. You know. Lastly, we must admit that even if we go for the sloganeering that is as sweet as chocolate. Even if you go for the sloganeering that can make a woman get married in a second, it will not change the fact that we must agree as a people that that slogan should not create division among us. Because we have seen instances where people died, as Gloria said. And I'm glad that the hustlers understand that the economy must be built from the bottoms up. And that is what the Constitutional Amendment Bill is talking about. I don't know why they are very hesitant to say that in building the economy bottoms up, then we must now adopt the word as the primary unit of accelerated development, so that we start measuring development from the villages where there are millions of hustlers. Maybe you cannot speak of millions of hustlers in the city. They are at the bottom. How do you develop them from the bottom? You must take resources where they are. And not just resources, you must also support them through legislation in all the statutes that are relevant. That is the true spirit of a hustler. I believe, going forward, the hustlers will wake up and they'll join the team that is going to change the narrative, not just from the cut-offs, but through a constitutional amendment that guarantees the hustler prosperity.
Thank you very much, Fred, and of course, Lydia, and of course, Gloria.
I didn't get a chance to put my finger.
Oh my God, you offended us. You just sat here and got offended.
Gloria, you're always...
No, it's very simple. I wanted to say that this Hustler
10
Nation...
seconds.
No, the Hustler Nation...
Right of reply.
The Hustler Nation
we were responding to what she had said.
Is not one that is divisive.
It's
actually pushing for inclusivity.
Ladies,
and that's what
there is no evidence of that exclusion.
Thank you very much.
There is no evidence.
For that amazing conversation. And of course, back at home, thank you very much for keeping it tuned. Don't go too far because we are coming up next. Shikoka Itani and a guest, by the way, that you absolutely loved the last time she was here. We're going to be doing interactive in T-2 minutes. We'll be right back.